Dr. Smith, okay, we'll bring the other two speakers back, and we'll have all of our questions now. They are open. Either one of the speakers now, you're welcome to ask questions. We certainly want you to feel welcome to ask questions, because there's no such thing as a dumb question. It's something you need to know about. So we certainly encourage you not to be bashful about asking the questions you might like to ask. And we certainly have the authorities here to answer those this morning. Where do we start?
There's a question. Two Smiths.
Oh, wrong one. Can you recommend, you mentioned doing forage analysis. Can you recommend something that could provide some assistance in basically evaluating that analysis?
Yeah, so the question was, I made the blanket recommendation that we should all consider conducting a forage analysis. In terms of who you then go to get some assistance in interpreting that, for me, I think a county agent is absolutely the first place to start. Some of us may work with private industry nutritionists. I think that's another good place to go. We had developed a tool. It's pretty basic in its form at University of Tennessee, and it is available online at utbeef.com. That is designed as a forage analysis interpreter, but it's general in that it assumes the average requirements of the cow throughout the year. So it's not specific to the degree of this cow is 2 months into lactation, or she's a month or 2 months out from calving. I think y'all have also developed one here at University of Kentucky that's available online as well.
Good question. Next one.
I have a question. Actually, I have two questions for Dr. Smith, the second Dr. Smith. Because calves lose their immunity from their mother as time goes along, reaching toward 100 days, would it be beneficial to give a supplement colostrum with either 50 or 100 IgGs, even though we know that it got colostrum from the mother?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll just try to express. Is it worthwhile supplementing colostrum, even though you know that the calf got colostrum from its mom? Yeah. So if you looked at that graph, if you're really trying to extend the protection to an older calf, you probably won't accomplish very much. The antibody content of colostrum that dam is going to provide is really high relative to what any of the commercial supplements are. So while you might incrementally boost a little bit, it's not even as specific as the antibodies directed against the pathogens in your own herd, and it's only going to be a little bit. You're probably not buying yourself any additional time, and you are certainly buying yourself a lot of additional cost and labor.
My second question, I'm sorry. In the Sand Hills calving system, where they rotate, for a spring calving herd in the state of Kentucky that starts calving late February, early March, when we're freeze to thaw, we have water problems and plugging problems in our pasture at that point of time. What would you recommend, or how would you say coping with that in the state of Kentucky? Because if we were to implement that, even in a rotational grazing system, we're going to make our farm a mud field.
Yeah. So the question is, if you're implementing the Sand Hills calving system, there are some other challenges about the environment that might not make it work. We recognize that in the Sand Hills, you can put too many cows on a given area and overgraze it before the season and do a lot of damage, because that's pretty fragile land. You brought up the issue about water. Yeah, so there are times of the year when it may not be feasible to implement because of the availability of being able to provide water. Well, and beyond that, there's other reasons why it may not work in a particular system. I can tell you it works in a wide variety of systems. We've tested it out in dry lot settings. So we've had producers run hundreds of animals through dry lot settings and do the age segregation and have it work. So it's not about dilution of the calves over a lot of acres. It's really about protecting one calf from another calf. To get to your question, there's times when it won't work, and I have to acknowledge that. But you might be able to think about, are there other ways? Because somehow you're delivering water to cows all year round, right? So, oh, you're talking about rainfall, the mud. Well, yeah. So at the risk of offending everyone, and I apologize, but if your biggest problem is mud, and so we see this, we see it in eastern Nebraska, we see it everywhere in Mississippi, right? But if your biggest problem is mud, if that's the limiting factor, maybe that's not the time to be dropping calves, right? And so maybe there's, you move things back or you move things forward. It'd be better to be calving on frozen ground than on mud. It'd be better to be calving on dry ground later in the summer than on mud. That you have to fit the forage, right? You want to kind of match the forage to the milk production and so forth. But I think there's times when, if that really is the thing that is causing most of your problems, it's not the time to be having calves. Have I offended everybody with that?
I may add something to that really quickly. Just coming from Northern Virginia, pretty darn similar climate to where we are today. About the same rainfall. We calve January and February. One of the things that we found, and not a lot of science behind it, but it was based off of the ideas from the Sandhills calving system, was we have a designated calving pasture where we stockpile fescue. We start stockpiling fescue. We do not let cows graze that from June or July on. We're gonna clip it to where it's actually stockpiled vegetative growth that is clean, has had cattle off of it, and we move cattle into that pasture to calve, give them a couple days, and they go back out into the mud and whatever. And since doing that, scours went away. Now, I don't know how well that pairs with some of the science behind it, but it has been in a fescue environment that has worked really, really well for us. It's labor intensive, there's no doubt about that.
There are systems for managing mud that include having a circle of pastures around a common feeding area that's concrete or stone-based or whatever. The cows are going to come in, they're going to consume their forages, and then they're going to go back out to their pasture. Maybe multiple groups can use that same feeding area, but you're not feeding in mud, and you're not having, well, they may go out and have some problems. Just remember that if mud is if you're worrying about tearing up the pasture, well, you can't put more cows on it than what you can manage. And so in some of our things, as we've mapped these out, ranchers have said, I can't keep, this is not enough acres here. I'm not going to wait a whole week. I'm going to probably move in 3 days because I can't keep any more than this many animals in this particular pasture, and I'll have to move on. So there's a little bit of environmental management that may help as well.
This is for Dr. Givens. If you vaccinate your calves prior to weaning with a live or a modified live vaccine, and you turn them back in with the cows, is there any danger to the fetus that cow would be carrying through lactation?
Great question. Question has to do with vaccination of the calf who's nursing a pregnant cow. And there are really two ways to go with that answer. One, I can tell you that both Boehringer Ingelheim and Zoetis, previously Pfizer, have done the study with their modified live, small numbers of animals. And in those studies, they did not show transmission from that naive calf nursing the pregnant cow as far as transmission and problems. So I say that to say, yes, I know the labels. I know that there's a labeled stipulation not to vaccinate calves nursing pregnant cows that are naive. So one, I will tell you the research says I'm not really worried about that. I'm willing to vaccinate a calf nursing a pregnant cow. But there's a bigger question underlying your question, and that is we've got naive cows here. And in all honesty, I want that cow to be the one that has good immunity, hopefully, because as a heifer, she got some modified lives, and then we're boostering that annually. And if your cow is well vaccinated, if the cow is immunized, there's absolutely zero concern whatsoever about vaccinating a calf that's nursing a pregnant cow because the cow's already well immunized. So twofold answer. One, I'm not real concerned about the calf shedding it to the cow. Two, I would hope that our cows are well immunized such that we're really not worried about it at all.
This one's for Dr. David Smith. On the coronavirus, what products are you using for the respiratory portion for bovine coronavirus on both nursing calves and weaned calves?
So now I get into a little bit of trouble because I'm asking you to vaccinate for coronavirus for respiratory disease, and there's not a label. There's a new product, Bovilus, that has been used, and there's an old product called Calf Guard that has been used. Those would be things that a veterinarian would have to advise on an extra label basis. Yeah, well,
This is for Dr. Smith number 1, I guess. My question is, when I run calves or cows through the chute, I'll do the pour-on wormer, and I give them a shot also. Am I wasting my money, or I just want to make sure they get wormed good? Got another question.
is that for me? Yes.
My next question is, when I wean my heifer calves off from the cows, make sure they're not bred, and I do castrate my bull calves at birth, but I give them a shot, Ludolite.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. The first question was about a decision to deworm the calves at weaning. Is that right? Okay. So the question is, do you need to do both? So this is all right. So do you need to? What's the extent that of deworming that needs to happen? And it's very popular right now to use like multiple, a white dewormer and an ivermectin type dewormer. You may be talking about two of the same class of dewormers. The reason why that's become popular is because of developing resistance, increasing resistance. Not everybody needs to do that. Not everybody needs to even deworm their calves at weaning, right? This depends on a little bit of the parasite load. And so what I would say is that if you really want to evaluate that question and save yourself some cost on product, work with a veterinarian to evaluate the parasite load of the calves at that point in time and decide and then use a product and look at the level of resistance that you might have by following up with some egg counts afterwards, right? You can pretty easily make a decision about whether those dewormers are being effective and whether you need to use multiple classes of dewormers to control the parasites. But it takes a little bit of investigation. Do you have any?
Yeah, the thing I'd add to that is just be conscientious if you do ever move away from the pour-on, is that you're getting some external parasite control out of a pour-on that you do not get out of an injectable. So depending upon time of years, maybe some fly control, but for me, lice. And that can be replaced just with another non-dewormer pour-on. And it'd be quite a bit cheaper if you do move away from that pour-on dewormer.
And maybe I could add, if you're using pour-on dewormers for fly control, you should come up with a better strategy, because we already have challenges with resistance to these dewormers, and that's not the best way to do it.
The second part of his question was, if he's castrating the bull calves at birth, should he be concerned about needing to use new lice and heifers?
Yeah. So again, it's the same. I think my answer is the same about that. So you're worried about that you may have some heifers that have conceived because you have bull calves out there. Part of that answer is, well, how old are they and how growthy are they? And so there may be some risk. And again, a veterinarian could help you with evaluating some of the risk of pregnancies in those. Yeah. Well, so that's the right. That's the balance of the economics. Is it just more economical to use the product to maybe take care of those very few animals that probably are pregnant?
Let's move on to the next question, please. You can catch them afterwards if you
Yeah.
don't mind.
My question is for Dr. Jason Smith. You mentioned earlier about dried distillers grains being kind of a magic bullet sometimes in nutrition, but I think the problem a lot of us have with dried distillers grains is just from a practical standpoint, trying to handle them. They're bad about bridging, and if you have a cone bottom feeder or feed box and sits around too long, I just wonder some practical strategies for using dried distillers grain.
Yeah, so practical strategies for using dried distillers grains that avoid some of the logistic hurdles, because those are real. Some of it tends to depend on the plant they're coming from as well, but what we found is obviously if you can store them on the floor rather than in a bin, they're a lot easier to handle. To make them flow out of a bin, I have heard quite a bit of anecdotal evidence that 10 to 20 pounds of bentonite clay per ton, if you can get it blended into it, will allow it to flow. I would expect the same would be true for limestone. I can't verify that, but the folks that I've worked with that are doing some of those things have had good experience. And there are some locations that are willing to bag commodities such as dried distillers. Obviously that adds costs, but from a handling standpoint, it makes it a little more simple. You can buy cubed and pelleted versions of dried distillers. Obviously there's a pretty high upcharge there now as well. I don't want to say they're necessarily the silver bullet or the fix-all cure. I really appreciate distillers as an economical source of supplemental energy and protein. But we can do a very similar thing with gluten and soy hull pellets, or even gluten and corn in certain situations. And that's where, to me, it's, that list of things I went through of considerations. One, can you even handle it, and will it even work for you? And if Distillers doesn't, it's out, and focusing on those options that are, one, viable to begin with, but then with which of those are left, what's the most economical option if we need to add, a 2 or 3/10 a pound of protein per day or certain amount of energy per day, trying to optimize what that ingredient is. And in all situations, that's probably not going to be Distillers, but it works well for a lot.
This for Dr. Gibbons. I fall calf, and typically I would, when I wean the calves in 6 to 7 months, I would give a live virus at weaning, and then 2 or 3 weeks later give them a second one. Okay, a lot of times I catch them like 3 months old for either for parasites or for implant. If I give one of those live viruses then, and then wait and give the second one at weaning, would that be sufficient, or would it be better to keep doing it while I'm doing it?
Keep doing it the way you're doing it.
Chris, go ahead and ask yours, and then I'll come back for you.
I had a question about the impact of tall fescue toxicosis on the immune system of the animal of vaccinations. Most of our cows, of course, are exposed to toxic tall fescue in Kentucky.
you see all of us passing microphones around on that one. I can tell you that we've done several of the vaccine efficacy studies on cattle that were on pasture, on end-of-fight infected fescue, and the vaccines demonstrate efficacy in animals grazing end-of-fight infected fescue. I know of no study that has been a controlled study of saying, okay, we're going to put these animals on end-of-fight fescue and have another randomized control group that are not on end-of-fight infected fescue. But I can tell you several of the efficacy studies that we've done have been cattle on infected fescue. We've not seen problems there. Now, that's just looking at the presence of end-of-fight on whether or not you can stimulate immunity. We could get a better definition of things, the overall nutritional impact on those animals, as far as heat tolerance and other things. Certainly, the overall nutrition associated with cattle on end-of-fight infected fescue can result in an impact on immunization, and Jason Smith can give you a better detailed answer on that than Dan Givens can.
To me, it comes down to mineral nutrition with end-of-fight infected tall fescue. It's what we have at home. I really, really appreciate that forage. But there is some evidence that that toxic component, that alkaloid, will bind some of the trace minerals and make them relatively unavailable to the animal. And so if we're in the situation where that is occurring, and that animal, if it has mineral deficiencies, it is going to have a subpar immune response. And that is my expectation. There are things, we can manage around those to some degree, and that complementary mineral program is going to be one of those things that we can use to do it. And the other would be some of the other management strategies to try to minimize exposure of those cattle to the alkaloid.
Yes, my question is on vaccines. On weaned cattle or purchased cattle and given a booster, do you recommend a live or a kill, then a live, or 2 kills or 2 lives?
So this is a tactical question. It's going to look at your whole operation. Would encourage you to talk with your veterinarian about the specifics in your operation. But as I understand it, if you're talking about purchased cattle coming in, and you're going to give them 2 doses, and you're wanting to know, hey, how would you play with the doses on that? What tactic would you take? And I go back to principles of, I've seen train wrecks where you get really, really high stress calves with lots of commingling. You bring them in, and then on top of all of the stress, cold, hot, trailer, diesel fuel, dust, commingling, you add a modified live to that, and you get a train wreck. And sometimes it's the modified live that added to the train wreck, okay? And I've also seen situations where they got them in really stressed, gave them a kill, they didn't have any problems at all initially, but then once they got out 2 or 3 weeks, they had bad respiratory disease because they didn't have any efficacy. So you're asking a specific tactical question on what should I do there. If you're going to give 2 doses, I will tell you that I'm an advocate of give 2 modified lives or give 2 kills. If you start doing this thing where you give a killed and then a modified live, there's a lot of question about how much good you're doing. If you've given a modified live and then are going to give a killed 3 to 5 weeks later, I don't have good data to say that's a good program. So I tend to look at it and say, how stressed is the group? If they're not that stressed and I think we can endure a modified live initially, I'll get that modified live to them in early on. The one pathogen that really does need boosting, even in a modified live, so the general rule of thumb is that 1 dose of BVD and IBR in a modified live form is going to stimulate good immunity. The one exception to that rule of 1 dose with the modified live is bovine respiratory syncytial virus, BRSV. A lot of the products with BRSV are labeled that you need a booster on the modified live BRSV 3 to 5 weeks later. So that's one situation where if I'm really thinking I want good efficacy here, my stress early on is not much, I'd love to get 2 modified lives into them. But if you got bad weather, train wreck, dust, diesel fuel, lots of bad things happening, Just know that a blanket recommendation to say 2 modified lives in that group of stressed calves can actually cause more harm than good. That's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully you see some of the balance you're trying to make out of it.
Could I comment on that as well? Because we just published a study not too long ago. I assume you're talking about receiving stocker calves, right? So we tested a modified live vaccine on arrival to a group of high-risk stocker calves coming out of the sale barns in Mississippi. The calves that received vaccines on arrival were 3 times more likely to get sick, 6 times more likely to die, and had reduced weight gains, right? So it's exactly the scenario that he's talking about. The vaccine was the thing that contributed to their sickness and death and reduced performance. So the system's view of that would be that you really want the protection that these vaccines can afford you. That protection needed to be provided 3 weeks earlier. What we need is a system to reward cow-calf producers for giving those vaccines for you, and that you're then purchasing them.
Dave, you just made friends with everybody.
Yeah,
you were offending everybody earlier. You got it back. That was good.
Question for Dr. Givens, kind of along the...
Just 1 second here. It's a good time to do one more thing here. I think that last question, that last comment was very, very good here. We all need to appreciate that we're in the business of producing food. And we don't need to divorce ourselves from those calves when we take them to the stockyard. We need to put the whole program together, and I'd like these 3 guys to talk about that, but that should be our goals, and it's kind of like what we'd like to think about as a committee here. We want to try to work toward the goal of us all being food producers and realize that every calf we sell is going to be finished, and then they're all going to be slaughtered and processed, and we're all going to eat those. And make no mistake, what's kind of kept us in the ball game market-wise now is high-quality beef. I hope you read Dr. Spear's article in the last beef publication on the web, but all these things contribute to the health in the feedlot and the quality of the product we're eventually producing. So that's what we're after. Any one of you like to talk about that just a little bit?
Just reiterate, the system's approach to that says that we have to develop relationships. Unless you're going to own that calf all the way through feedlot and slaughter, we've got to develop relationships that are built on data, information, and trust. And to do that's a difficult thing, but I always talk with students about it, especially students that really don't understand the beef industry, and the example I give sometimes is it's like if you have a big bake sale and your grandmother has a chocolate cake recipe that is the most amazing chocolate cake recipe in the world, and you got your grandma's chocolate cake and you're going to take it in this huge bake sale and expect to get more money for that special chocolate cake, and there are 62 chocolate cakes and nobody can tell the difference between any of your chocolate cakes, and your chocolate cake loses identity, meaning they don't know what's been done with that cake. They don't know the recipe. You didn't develop the relationship. You didn't get the information through the sale process. That chocolate cake is going to sell like any other chocolate cake does. So as Dave Smith talks about system, as Dr. Gordon Jones talks about, understanding the big picture, I look at the system and say, if I'm not going to own that calf all the way through, I've got to develop relationships where the information about how that calf has been handled gets through the system and the information is accurate and validated.
So one of the challenges of that I'm sure it exists in Kentucky, it happens in a lot of places, is that the larger operations can have that relationship, right? They can market their calves directly on their reputation, and they are going to do the things to protect their reputation. But if the chocolate cake gets mixed in and you can't tell it, there's no reputation. So there are technologies coming that may solve some of that. So there are technologies where there might be identification that follows the calf, the good things that you did to your calf, even though you might be marketing smaller numbers and you don't have that direct relationship, the information can follow, and you might be able to be rewarded for those things. I would urge the members of the Kentucky Cattlemen's Association to pay attention to to the technology that's coming where this information might get exchanged, because there's opportunities for those people that currently don't enjoy a reputation to be able to market their calves because of the good things that they do. So maybe some electronic technologies in the future can help you share the good things that you've done and pass that information along, and you can get paid for sharing that information.
Question for Dr. Givens, kind of going back to that original thought process. You were saying that from day 5 to 9 following a vaccination, you get an elevation in the white blood cell count, and you kind of want to avoid stress. Historically, what I had been doing to avoid giving a modified live to a suckling calf was a killed about a week before weaning, and then waiting after weaning 2 or 3 weeks after they've settled down, and then following with a modified live. Would you stick with that, change that killed pre-weaning around that stress, do a modified live pre-weaning? What's your thoughts there?
So as we talk through that, let me make sure that I try to get one piece of information across the communication bridge effectively. The vaccine will actually stimulate a decrease in the white blood cells in the circulating bloodstream. We're not sure where those white blood cells are going, but we know that we're having that decrease in white blood cells that you quoted there. On your specific situation, you're using an interesting tactic to me. I have no doubt that your vaccination post-weaning, modified live post-weaning, is being really effective. I need to be honest with you and tell you I'm not sure that preceding killed is doing a whole lot. Now, there is some data that creates some interest, and Dave Smith may want to comment on that as well, but I don't know that killed that you're given preceding weaning, I don't know that you're creating prevention of disease when you wean them. I do think your modified live is effective following that. Dave, you want to comment on that?
No, I think I agree with you. I don't think I can add to it.
Yep.
I'll just yell out. On the sand hills calving, sometimes it works better for us to group the cows that have calves and group away from the cows that have calves. Is that a big no-no, or are we better but maybe not as good as it could be?
Yeah, so we're talking about, the question is about if you're trying to maintain this age segregation, there's really 2 approaches. One is that you move the pregnant cows away and let the pairs stay where they were born, or do you pull out the calves? So you're from a central calving area. Yeah, so it's interesting. I know places that can make that work, and if it's working for you, don't change anything. But I know that when we started, we had a lot of operations in Nebraska that they did that. They said, well, we're going to maintain our calving lot. We're going to calve in these lots, and we'll just pair out for a week in this pasture, then we'll pair them out to this pasture. And they saw no success at all. And, well, that common calving lot is the source of the contamination over the time. So the calves, by the time they're pulled out of there, they've already had a mouthful of whatever's going to make them sick before they ever get pulled out. I've seen it work where that calving lot is a very large, extensive pasture, and really there's not an opportunity for that environment to get heavily contaminated. But if you're talking about a very concentrated lot that all of the calves are going to go through, they'll be born in the soup that's going to make them sick. So it can work, but it doesn't always work.
You have time for one last question?
Yeah, let's do one last question. Really appreciate your question, but we better kind of wind it up here.
All right. My question was back to what you were talking about before. If you're receiving stocker cattle and you don't know a vaccination history, do you think you would be better off to wait 4 or 5? I don't know what the period might be. Several days and allow them to eat a good starter feed, de-stress, put them on plenty of water and mineral, and then wait and process them maybe 5. I don't know what that day, how many days later it should be, but I just wonder if that would be a better option than trying to process them as soon as they come off of
I think
come from the
that
yards.
we're between a rock and a hard place here, right? So you got calves that are going to get sick, right? These are high-risk calves we're talking about. You're bringing them in. They're going to get sick in the next 2 weeks, right? So you're asking a vaccine which isn't really going to give them any good immunity for 3 weeks or more to try to protect them in this window of time when it probably can't happen. And if you do it under the heavy stress, well, what you do set them up is to fail, because now they're dealing with this vaccine challenge that their body has to respond to, and the effects that it's going to have on immunity. So I don't think there is a good time. You're asking that vaccine to do something that it can't do. It's not different from trying to vaccinate 600-pound bulls for tetanus and expecting that vaccine is going to protect them against tetanus. We have the same problem.
Let's give these speakers another big round of applause. And speakers, please stay right here just a moment. We're very fortunate to have had and still have a wonderful agronomist in the state of Kentucky, Dr. Gary Lacefield. And for those of you who have not read the new book on Fescue, I'll give you a little hint. If you'll come to the Forage program tomorrow afternoon, you might get one for free. Dr. Lacefield, please come up and present one of these to each of our speakers. We really appreciate your willingness to do that. This is a fantastic book. I just couldn't lay that thing down when I first got it until I read it all. So they've done a wonderful job, Dr. Lacefield and his co-workers. Give them a big hand again. Thank you, Dr. Lacefield. Speakers will be glad to visit with you about some of the other questions you might have as we get finished here. Anybody else got a ticket you need to put in a box? Dr. Lim Cooler keeps passing around getting a few more tickets. We want everybody to have the opportunity to win this $100 bill.
Okay. Tell them a little bit about the program tomorrow if they haven't seen it. Anything now? Nope. There we go.
Our program tomorrow is one on the history of tall fescue, along with several other things. We invite you at 2 o'clock. We've got several of our forage people who put together an outstanding program, except for the first paper. After we get through the first paper, you'll enjoy it. So come on out, and we do have a complimentary copy of the new book on the history of tall fescue for you.
Thank you, Dr. Lacefield. Are you ready to draw? Anyone else want to put a ticket in the box here? We're getting ready to make that award.
All right, young man, draw me one out. You did this for me last year, if I remember right. Thank you. Lunch is in the trade show.
David Embry, are you still here?
David Embry.
David Embry. Okay, we better get another one. By the way, lunch is in the trade show area as soon as we leave here. Lunch is available in the trade show area. Now the winner is Eric Thompson. Eric is here. Congratulations. Thank you all for coming. Please fill out your evaluation there. If you do that, we'd appreciate that.
Just leave the evaluations on the chairs.
Yeah, just leave your evaluations. We'll gather those. And we'll look forward to having another one of these next year.